Okay, back to the Buckeyes and Sevyn Banks. Steve, it was always my impression at one point that once the wave of players led by a Jeff Okudah, that class, Jordan Fuller, Damon Arnett, left, that Sevyn Banks was supposed to be there was a time frame when he was considered like, could he be the number one corner? Am I missing out on that? But his career just kind of drifted off into nothing, and now he's hit the transfer portal.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to describe it. Drifted off into nothing, and it's unfortunate because he seems to have some talent, and there were a lot of people after last season that thought, maybe he could be an NFL draft pick, and he came back to Ohio State but was injured basically from the first part of the season on, only played sparingly all season long, and I think there's some kind of disconnect between him and Ohio State. On Monday, Coach Day said that he was going to sit down with Sevyn and his parents and talk about his future plans. And even then, Ryan was kind of adamant that it doesn't involve Ohio State. So I think that maybe the option wasn't there for him to come back to Ohio State as a super senior. And I don't want to say he burned any bridges or anything else like that. But, he was in and out of the lineup all season long. And I just wonder if at some point the coaches just said, we don't want to go through another year of this where we don't know if he's in, he's out, he's in, he's out. And I'm just speculating. And, just the consistency issue, I think, availability and consistency, I think were the two things that kind of probably painted him into this corner to where he will not be back at Ohio State. And obviously, they've got two starters coming back, Cameron Brown, who seemed to bypass him, and Denzel Burke, who was a shooting star as a freshman, had just a fabulous freshman year as a starter at cornerback. The two worst games he played were his first one and his last one, it seemed like, or rather the Michigan game, because he was banged up a little bit against Michigan. The first game, he had a pass interference penalty in the end zone against Minnesota, but otherwise played pretty well. So, Banks, again, put this on the stack of about 30 or 40 other unanswered questions that we had from this season of why did this happen or what happened with this? And they do a good job of keeping all this stuff in-house because you never know about it, but pretty clear that he wants to play more college football, but it will not be at Ohio State. So there you take that for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, not only was he out there in the way too early mock drafts as the number one corner, there was a mock draft that had him out there as overall number one player. So funny how things kind of happen, but we sit there and we see these measurables mean so much in these mock drafts. I mean, there are not a lot of 6'1", 200-pound corners that just, he was coming off of a decent enough year in 2020. I mean, granted, it was a short season, 23 tackles, fumble recovery, an interception, 7 passes defended. But, to Steve's point, he certainly his availability was spotty this year. His no-show to the Rose Bowl only to show after the fact. I mean, him, tweeting out a picture of himself at like some wing place in Orlando while everybody else is going through drills, and in a rainy Southern California leading up to the Rose Bowl was questionable. And at that point, I think it was pretty obvious to anybody who was watching that he played his last game with Ohio State. And then as they're sitting there putting together their super seniors, it just never really felt like he was going to be a guy that was going to be back. I was most curious about the fact of we learned today that he was going to be in the draft, apparently, and then is withdrawing from the draft to go into the transfer portal. So, I guess part of that could just be a vehicle of, well, you're technically done with your regular eligibility, so you're already just put into the draft. You're not necessarily declaring for the draft, and that you have to opt out to use this additional year the COVID year, what have you, to be able to go and play in the, put yourself in the portal and continue playing. So Ohio State has some returning starters with Cam Brown and with Denzel Burke, and has some young guys. And I just think this is the best move for everybody, because I'm just not sure that there was a lot of faith that they were going to get a lot out of Sevyn Banks moving forward, and it was going to maybe slow down the development of some of the younger guys, like a Ja'Kalen Johnson, a Jordan Hancock, by still playing this game of Willie or won't he with Sevyn Banks from week to week.
Yeah, I think this past season definitely soured OSU on having him back. And I did find it interesting that Day did say on Monday that Sevyn Banks is moving on, and that he's going to talk to his family about that, as if he was going to let them know at that point, almost like he let the media know first. But then in Sevyn Banks' tweet today saying that he's entering the portal, he says, "I will be entering the NCAA transfer portal, leaving my options open to wherever God leads me to dominate into a greater chapter of my college career, whether it's here at the Ohio State or going beyond." And he may have missed the memo on Monday, but it's going to be beyond at this point. And I think one of the issues, and I wonder about this, is it was assumed that he was a first rounder. It was assumed that Shaun Wade was a first rounder. And Shaun Wade certainly played really, really well in 2019. Dipped a bit, obviously, in 2020. Was still named a first-team All-American, because I think a lot of time, All-American voters are just it's hard to know a lot of names in terms of football players to vote for. But when you just start assuming that this happens, that's when it stops happening. Like, it takes much more than, well, I'm next in line, so this is what happens. And I think certainly he had the potential. Kerry Combs had talked about it for years. Well, he's fast, he's long, he's 6'1", he's big, he has all of these tools. But then I think Ryan Day alluded to, or maybe came out and straight mentioned at some points this season, just practice habits weren't what they needed to be. And it was just, like Steve said, a very odd year, and one that certainly, even though he could come in with a clean slate with the new defensive coaches, I don't think he would have come in with a clean slate with Ryan Day.